All right, so I have a wooden countertop here that's my work surface, but obviously if you have a large cutting board, anything will work. Wood is really great, but you can do it on, pretty much any countertop. You just have to use enough flour. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my proofing basket, and this is a piece of parchment paper that I crumpled it up into a ball. This is a great trick because this is not flat, this was flat, but now what I do is I take my basket. Now it makes it easy to line. Now usually when you read instructions on how to make sourdough bread, you have a basket here that's lined with a floured cloth. You put the dough in it, and then before you put it in the oven, you dump it out, and then you pick it up and you put it in the oven. And I found that was a real pain in the butt, and it kept sticking to the cloth. So what I do is I put the loaf in this parchment paper, and then I pick this whole thing up and stick it in the oven. It's way easier. Now, you also don't need a proofing basket for this. If you have, it's just anything this shape. So if you had like a loaf pan or something, that would work great too. Because we're not going to be doing a long proofing in here, if we were going to be fermenting this in here for a long period of time, like several hours, the way you normally would if you're making these kinds of breads, then you need the air to be able to flow through here. In this case, we're only going to leave this like this for maybe an hour or so while we preheat the oven. Again, I just go for the lazy style of cooking. So when I'm baking my bread, I just proof this usually for about an hour, and that's about it. Okay, so now, move that out of the way. I'm going to take and flour my work surface. Now here's the tricky part. So you can see that this has risen up and it's oozed into the bowl. I can see a couple little bubbles that have popped. I see some bubbles that are starting to kind of stretch. If you see a lot of holes in the top, that means that the bubbles have popped and your bread is over risen, and it won't turn out good at all. But this is perfect. I've got a little bit of fluid on the top, that's okay. But here's the tricky part. I want to get all of this out onto here without popping bubbles in the bread. In other words, I don't want to tear the dough. If I tear the dough, it's not gonna be the same. So what I do is I flour my scraper and I just try and release it. Now the dough is going to come out right now really easily because it's actually cold. It was in the refrigerator. So I find that it's a lot easier to work with. It becomes really stiff when it's been in the refrigerator. If it's just, if I had just done it last night, this would be a more challenging process. So if you're learning, it's probably a good strategy to put the dough in the refrigerator overnight before you do this step, because it really is a lot easier. So now I'm going to pull the dough and stretch it over. A bench scraper is really an essential kitchen tool, and I didn't know that before I had a wooden countertop and before I started making bread. Now I use this thing all the time. But what it's used for here, I'm going to flour my hand and I'm going to slide it under, and I'm going to grab the dough and stretch it over on itself. And what I want to do is I want to get that like nice crust. It has a bunch of like big, what they're called ears on it, but that big crispy crust. You have to pull the gluten fibers tight. So I'm going to do this 4 times, 1 on each side. 2, 3, and now I can kind of move this loaf around, and then 4. Okay, now I'm going to put it upside down. So now I have a seam on the bottom and the loaf on the top. Now I'm going to kind of use the bench scraper in my hand to kind of form it a little bit. So it's going to stretch and sort of form. If I'm making a round loaf, I'll form it into a ball. In this one, I'll form it into kind of a log shape. Again, you notice I'm not kneading the dough. I'm pinching it into the shape I want. If I wanted to make it round, I would pinch it in all 4 directions. Since I want to make a sausage-shaped loaf, pinch it one direction. Now I do this. Pick it up, put it in the basket, and now I can let this sit here for an hour, 2 hours. Because this is out of the refrigerator, I want to add an extra half an hour for it to come up to room temperature, and then about an hour or so for it to just sort of ooze into the shape of the basket. So let the dough kind of relax into the shape that it's going to be. So now the top is tight, and then I want it to relax into the shape it's gonna be, we're gonna cut it and then put it in the oven. And then that's it.